comedy is one of the most important tools in combating bullies and dictators and intolerance. And it's just to sort of say that comedy is not really an important art form, I think is a little ignorant.
Born in Wellington, New Zealand in 1975 to a Maori farmer and a European school teacher, Taika Waititi has managed to become a Hollywood blockbuster director without losing any of his indie credibility. Nominated for awards as both an actor and director, Waititi began performing in college in a comedy troupe called So You're a Man with fellow Flight of the Conchords alumni Bret McKenzie and Jermaine Clement. Before cutting his first feature film, Waititi is credited with several shorts, including Two Cars, One Night, which served as the inspiration for a later film, Boy, and 2005's short What We Do in the Shadows. Two Cars, One Night was nominated for an Oscar for Best Short Film, and the nomination scored him an invitation to the Sundance Writers Lab to develop the script based on the short. His first feature, 2007's Eagle vs. Shark, starred Jermaine Clement alongside Waititi's real-life girlfriend at the time, and chronicles two socially awkward misfits. The theme of emotionally stunted man-children is present throughout much of Waititi's work, and it seems to be linked to his father leaving the family when Waititi was still very young. Ready for a second draft of Two Cars, One Night, 2010's Boy expanded on the short's premise and saw Waititi both direct and act in the film as the titular boy's estranged father. Boy grossed $40 million worldwide and gave Waititi the gravitas to get real funding to bring another one of his shorts to the big screen, 2014's What We Do in the Shadows. Shot mockumentary style and starring his comedy friends from New Zealand, Shadows was a droll film about the mundane aspects of cohabitating vampires. The film was a universal cult favorite, but Waititi wasn't ready to sell out just yet. First, he made 2016's The Hunt for the Wilderpeople, another film about a stunted boy in his search for a father figure. Waititi had paid his dues, and when he was tapped to direct a major blockbuster, Thor Ragnarok, he had his work cut out for him. Waititi was equal to the challenge of bailing out a struggling Thor franchise that was reeling from two lackluster standalone films. Waititi had the world's undivided attention now, and he came back from Thor swinging with one of the best films of 2019, Jojo Rabbit, a dark, satirical film about Nazi Germany. Currently finishing work on a soccer-themed movie, and due to return for the next installment of the Thor franchise, Waititi can do whatever he wants right now. Whether the next one he makes is for him or for Hollywood, chances are the world will line up on opening night.
Welcome back to Film Hooligans. I'm your host, Jon Dunning, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jason Alt. What's up, man?
Oh, just living the dream.
Living the dream, talking about films and filmmakers. And for this very special episode, we are traveling down south to the land of the Kiwis. We're talking Taika Waititi, a different filmmaker than what we've covered before, and in some aspects very similar to other filmmakers. But before we get too far, I want to introduce my special guest. Jason, I'm drinking beer again. I am back on, for the first time, I'm having a Lucille. It's an IPA from Georgetown up here in Washington, Seattle, Washington, 7%er. It is hoppy goodness, and I feel glad to be back on the sauce.
A loose seal? Sounds good.
Sounds like something you find in New Zealand.
7%, that'll bite your hand off. I'm drinking my very last Founders KBS Espresso. If you like coffee, I recommend it. If you like KBS, but don't like coffee, maybe not so much. I'm not glad to be out of it, I guess, but I saved the last one for a special occasion, and that is tonight. So, Prost.
L'chaim. And you might not know this, audience, about Jason Alt, but I know this about Jason Alt. He is not a fan of coffee, so the fact that you like this beer is a bit perplexing to me.
Espresso isn't coffee.
It's all bean juice. Let's jump right into it. So this man grew up in Wellington, where if you are a fan, you might have played on such films as Boy. He is the spawn of a Maori father. His father was a Maori. He was a farmer / artist. Mother was a European.
Is it pronounced Maori or Maori? When you say Maori, it kind of sounds like he's, son of the Povich.
But then I say Maui and I think of The Rock from, Moana.
Maui, Maui, it is the reason we all gathered here today.
It's exactly it. Well, and that's a good segue because his mother is a European Jewish school teacher. So, no other filmmaker that I think we've talked to has his the home life situation kind of melded their films so much as Taika Waititi, because his parents split up when he was 5. He was raised by his mother, and that would be just the overarching theme of 80% of his films.
Yep, it's all immature man boys with no father figure. That's all his movies.
Thanks for
the
coming.
End. But I mean, he's got a unique perspective, and he does a good job getting it across. It's about those people, but it's not about that.
Mm-hmm.
Always,
right.
I mean, Hunt for the Wilder People literally was that, but not always.
Yeah, he studied theater at Victoria University of Wellington, graduated in 97, so he did the whole spiel. And while he was in college, he actually became a member of the 5-man touring comedy troupe, So You're a Man. It was kind of like the New Zealand version of like Kids in the Hall, with fellow actors Jermaine Clement and Brent McKenzie that would go on to do
Flight of the Conchords.
That's right. And The Humor Beast, which was kind of the same thing, but with more music. Like other filmmakers that we talked about on here, like Macon Blair and Jeremy Saulnier. The filmmakers that came from a collaborative origin seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you will, more well-rounded, because I feel like they were able to bounce ideas off each other more. And there's always one that kind of rises to the top. You got Jay Charkazar from
Chandrasekhar.
Yeah, from Broken Lizard, and
Jay Charizard. That's
a
super
Pokemon.
offensive.
Yikes. We'll cut that.
Leave it in, you racist.
I can't say that he's gone on to have the most success, but of course, Jermaine Clement and Brent McKenzie also have as well. They just tend to be more well-rounded when they're coming out of these troops.
But I think that they benefit from it, and I think when you have a couple different people's point of view collaborating to a project, that helps the project, certainly. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to make any pronouncements about whether that's a better system, but I think it has had a tendency to produce good creatives, and when the collaborative is good, it launches everybody. Mm-hmm. Kind of the way, I haven't heard much from Brett McKenzie these days. Mm-hmm. I think he was making film scores or something like that. Jermaine Clement is acting a little, but Taika is the busiest, obviously, but it's possible the other two were more interested in music than they were in film, and there's nothing wrong with that. But no. It still did, kind of launch all of them to prominence.
Yeah, it's like a comfort level thing too, I think. And he started as an actor. He had small roles in Scarface, Snakeskin, The Strip, and then of course, Jason, the best superhero film ever. And that's Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern.
If you're implying it's the worst, it's hard to say what the worst one is. Half of them have been bad.
It's probably better than X3, Last Stand, but maybe.
How dare you?
Oh,
how?
Do not be
dare
a Brett Ratner apologist on this show, sir.
I'm sorry, did Green Lantern have Vinnie Jones as the Juggernaut? I don't think so.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
As a lot of the filmmakers that we talk about, Taika Waititi started shooting comedy shorts. And he did one comedy short that kind of went all the way almost. It was a short film called Two Cars, One Night. And it got all the way to, in 2005, was nominated for the Best Live Action Short Film in the Academy Awards.
That was a fact. And I'm not sure what more I can contribute to you stating a fact, other than, yes, that was a conclusion I came to in my own independent research.
I think that's when he started kind of showing his character. Because, make no mistake, he writes great characters, but he is also a character himself. And that was when they're like announcing the nominees at the Oscars, and he's acting like he's asleep. Watching Taika Waititi interviews is like watching a stand-up skit or like a Kids in the Hall episode. He is always on, and that is quite tiring sometimes.
Well, audience questions. First is from Ben. Where's Ben? Ben is somewhere in this room.
Hi, Ben.
I think in the back. Okay.
Oh, hey, Ben. How you doing, Ben? How's it going, Ben?
Next question is from Sebastian. Where's Sebastian? Somewhere. Oh, hello,
Oh, hey,
Sebastian.
Seb.
Our final question is from Jeff. Where's Jeff? Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
You get your own greeting as well from him.
Yeah. I've known people who are like always on off stage, and it's like watching Jim Carrey get interviewed. It's like, calm down, dude. People just want to know about the movie. Just answer some questions. There's probably a certain amount of anxiety that he's acting out. Like people don't do that to be obnoxious. There's usually something else going on. If he had a weird childhood and is sort of, capable of making this sad art about lonely people, then, it's possible there's something going on that he's sort of covering by being garrulous, I suppose. So more power to him, I guess. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the charm as well, because I think that's how all the actors that he works with, they all say that he is just extremely easygoing. He's very funny. He's just kind of like a big man child. I mean, he's very intelligent. I'm not saying he's just like a big dullard, but there's this kind of this ease about the shoots, and when there is someone else that does that we just talked about was Paul Thomas Anderson. He writes these great scripts, and he lets that be the work, so to speak, and his job, and it seems like Taika Waititi's job as well, listening to the people that he's directed, is just he's just there to kind of make everyone feel comfortable, and when you do that, you're getting authentic performances. Most technical filmmaker out there. Certainly, he does have some really cool style to most of his films. I think where he really shines is pulling authentic performances out from a 6-year-old to all the way down to a 5-year-old.
Sure. I think when we do these episodes, we kind of split the stuff into like filmmaking and cinematography, and he's really not that technically impressive as a cinematographer. A lot of the times he is, in the scene. So he's trying to direct while dressed like Hitler, or something like that. So, there's nothing, I think a good DP goes a long way on a movie like that, but we're not going to hold that against him necessarily, because like knowing what lens to use in what situation is useful for a director, but like, by no means can you not be a good filmmaker if you don't know the technical aspects of cinematography. That's why you have a DP.
Sure.
So I think as a filmmaker, as someone who writes and sort of creates the story and basically directs his vision, I think he executes very well. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna focus less on cinematography because he's like a kind of a Kiwi Wes Anderson, in his aesthetic, or sort of like it's like he makes the New Zealand Napoleon Dynamite, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of got that quirky aesthetic to it, but there's nothing really you do with a camera as much as you do with like setting things up. So we're just gonna focus on him as a filmmaker, which we're fine with.
Yeah, and I mean he does some real cool stuff. Like in his first feature, Eagle versus Shark, he has like stop motion inserted in there. That's probably his most Napoleon Dynamite feeling film.
It was Savage Steve Holland who loved the stop motion animation.
Yeah.
Like the Van Halen music video and Better Off Dead.
It's in like Hunter the Wilder People, there's that one like great scene where it's showing like them in pursuit, and it does this like full panoramic of like seasons changing and all this stuff, and it's shot like a chapter book. So I'm not, I don't want to come off as we're saying like he is completely inept at making shots interesting. He's no Gus Van Sant. He's got a little bit more style than that.
Sure, but I mean that's not his strength, and we're not going to judge him on that. Like anything aesthetically he does doesn't really have to do with cinematography as much as it does, just visioneering.
Yeah,
I guess I don't know, man. I didn't go to film school. I don't know I don't know what mise en scène means.
Mise en place, isn't that appetizers? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, but I mean that's really you're not there for that. I mean, you're there for costume. I mean, look at What We Do in the Shadows. It's not like it's a visual masterpiece. Its charm is the fact that it looks amateurish and it looks like a documentary.
That was the point. I kind of like when people do things creative.
Yeah.
To explain the limitations. Like Soderbergh had like no money to make Sex Lies and videotape. He's like, no, we shot this on VHS because that's what they were doing, not because I don't have any money. I kind of like when people cover up blemishes. Because What We Do in the Shadows was originally a short story, and it was, later adapted with more money, but he still kept that faux documentary aspect to it, to stay true to the original material. And originally it was shot VHS because that was what he had. So
lets the script and lets the performances speak for itself. So just like the makeup and the costumes, especially in that film, are it's more accentuated, right? It all feels very fish out of water, even though it's funny because he makes it feel like such a normalized thing that there's like zombies and werewolves and vampires walking around, New Zealand in this very this little mundane town. You go to like Thor Ragnarok and then it's just at that point though, like once you get to all Marvel movies, again, correct me if I'm wrong, are shot samey. They feel kind of similar no matter who the director is. I mean, they used to. They kind of used to. So here's what I think is interesting about Thor Ragnarok, if I could soapbox for a minute. Yeah.
Now, I think one of Marvel's, the MCU's most underrated movies was Ant-Man. And I think a lot of people were mad that what had happened was they hired Edgar Wright, who, did Shaun of the Dead and, those movies. Mm-hmm. They hired Edgar Wright, who had a very specific vision for Ant-Man. He wanted it to be very heist heavy, because he thought that was cool. One of the best stories he liked was the reason they brought in Scott Lang and Hank Pym. He liked the Scott Lang to catch a thief story arc.
Right.
So he wanted to do that. And Marvel kind of kicked him off the project because they're like, we appreciate that you're a great filmmaker, but this is, Kevin Feige said no. So Edgar Wright had too strong of an idea about what to do with it, and they sort of kicked him up. Here's how far away he was from Ant-Man. The script he basically wrote for Ant-Man ended up becoming Baby Driver.
And everyone won.
Yeah, I mean, everybody won, sure, but that's how far from the movie that they ended up with. Yeah, he got Baby Driver out of what he wanted to do for Ant-Man.
From the scraps of Ant-Man. Jesus.
So he was pretty far away, and Marvel shut it down. That's why they're like, hey, let's get people that are just sort of just gonna point a camera at two guys on stilts looking at a tennis ball. That's what we need. And then we'll spend 2 years making the movie in post, and that's what we want. The fact that they brought Taika Waititi in, who was going to put his thumbprint on the movie, and made such a departure from the rest of the MCU. It's like the complete polar opposite of Suicide Squad. That's Thor Ragnarok. It was bright, it was colorful, it was fun, it wasn't depressing. It was, it was them doing Planet Hulk at the same time under the auspices of a Thor movie. It was fantastic. So it's so remarkable that they brought in somebody that had such a radical idea about what to do with an MCU movie, and Marvel let him make it.
Right.
They didn't fire him and bring in, someone who just had done 2 movies before and they're just looking to prove they could be a Hollywood team player. they let a guy who makes very specific movies make a very specific movie within their, aesthetic, and it worked. I think that's truly remarkable, and it's to his credit that he was able to convince Marvel to let him make Thor Ragnarok and then bring him back for another Thor movie.
Well, I think I agree with you on everything as far as he made a Taika Waititi film. Script-wise, like it felt like the jokes were very on par with the rest of his films. But again,
to the extent that like Thor was never that quippy,
right?
And all of a sudden, Thor's quippy as hell.
He saved that character completely. I mean,
yeah.
Thor, is one of the big three. He's kind of an important piece of the Avengers, and they just couldn't figure out. They're like, we're just going to go the hot beefcake route.
Because Chris Hemsworth can't act.
Right, yeah. Except ironically, right?
Yeah.
That's why you have to put him in a fat suit and, make him play Fortnite. Because it's like, it's so against type. But he thrives in that, and good on Waititi for finding that and able to. I mean, he owes a little bit to I think Guardians kind of paved the way for Marvel to even make that step, or to allow him to make that step.
Sure, yeah. James Gunn deserves a lot of credit, because James Gunn came in. He's like, just let me shoot my shot. We'll make this crazy ass movie,
right? And
if it does well, cool. You can make more crazy ass space movies, which was led directly to Thor Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm.
But if it doesn't work out, you can just be like, well, look, no one had heard of Guardians of the Galaxy before. It doesn't matter. It's gone. Goodbye. Don't worry about it.
Right.
They could have been like, well, we make a stinker sometimes. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that James Gunn, paved the way, certainly for him. But didn't Guardians come out before Ant-Man? So
yeah. We're going to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the MCU. I think this is the first filmmaker that we've got that has directed an MCU film on this show. So it's not
still has indie cred though.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is great. Yeah.
So it's it's great that it doesn't always work out, right? Like Colin Trevorrow didn't even get to the set of a Star Wars film before they're like, maybe we've gone. Maybe this is a bridge too far. Jurassic World, okay, but this is Star Wars, where they could have very well been like, this is one of the big three, and this is probably our most challenging character because, Robert Downey Jr. is gold in anything, and Chris Evans was fine. He was on this resurgence, but they had this real Thor problem, and just for them to be like, nope, here's the keys to the kingdom, save it, and the fact that they did, and now guess who's, spoiler alert, he's the one that's still in the game. So it is huge, and it's going to be great, especially pairing those two groups together going forward. But just going strictly back to Waititi films, it's just like, what do you do right after you make Marvel money, right after you make MCU money? Well, you make you
do whatever you want.
You do a satire
That's what you
on
do.
Hitler. Yeah.
But I mean, when you've proven to Hollywood, they're like, look, they told me to make this movie, and not only did I make the movie, but like, I took Thor 2, which was easily the worst MCU movie.
Yes.
And completely turned that franchise around and made something really fun and memorable.
Mm-hmm.
And utilized Jeff Goldblum, which is like, he was there the whole time. I don't know why.
Right.
Nobody thought to put that weird bastard in an MCU movie before, but good on him.
He is a comic book character in real life.
The fact that he turned that around, he's like, can you give me lots of money to make what I want? And that's absolutely what happened. The budget for Jojo Rabbit was, in the tens of millions, because he proved he could not only like, he made an indie blockbuster,
mm-hmm.
sort of, so he's sort of like, just give me the money. And he got to make whatever he wanted.
And think about it now, like the stable of actors, just the complete delineation. The biggest name he had in a movie before Thor was Sam Neill. So it's just like, now he's in his completely original Hitler comedy drama, and already you're getting Sam Rockwell and ScarJo and Rebel Wilson, and they're all just
how'd he get her?
good directors could come off of their big break like Taika did with Thor Ragnarok, or even Rian Johnson, which he proved last year, coming off of Star Wars, and then he made Knives Out, and Taika made arguably his best film in Jojo Rabbit.
I'd argue.
Yeah?
It's very arguable.
Well, yeah, it is. It is very arguable. I mean, What We Do in the Shadows,
I put it in my top 10 movies of 2019, and you didn't, so...
I didn't see it. I didn't see it.
Where do you get the balls to record a best of 2019 episode?
And put Crawl on there and leave off?
You put Crawl on there, you plebeian.
I know. It's all right.
I'm embarrassed for both of us.
That was bad. It was real bad. I mean, it definitely would have been up there. And I
only saw 9 good movies. Give me a break.
Exactly. I'm like, what's another one? I think there was an alligator movie. That's got to be it. What, John? Like, go home. You're drunk. But Jojo Rabbit. Okay, yes, it is one of his most ambitious films for sure, and it's him with a budget, right? Like, him without a budget, creativity-wise, is What We Do in the Shadows, and it works. Him with a budget is Jojo Rabbit, and it also works. So that's a gleaming endorsement for him. So it was hard to sit down and watch a bunch of his films close together. I had a hard time. He's not very bingeable, because some of, especially his early work, it feels really... It just felt
samey.
Yeah, it felt like glue after a while. I'm like, I don't know if I'm watching Hunt of the Wilder People or Eagle versus Shark at this moment. But then, all in a vacuum, all of his films are really good. And that's, for a young director, I mean...
Yeah, just space it out a little bit, because, so a lot of his early stuff... is sort of the second draft of his shorts, like Boy came from Two Cars One Night, and like shot for shot some of the time it's remade, but it's remade better. So, it's funny. The last director we did before Taika Waititi was Paul Thomas Anderson, and he kind of did the same thing. He did a short called The Dirk Diggler Story, which became Boogie Nights, and Cigarettes and Coffee, not Coffee and Cigarettes, Cigarettes and Coffee, which became Hard 8 or Sydney. So, kind of seeing how somebody with more money, who went to the Sundance Lab, and Waititi had a film in the Sundance Lab too, so kind of seeing how people do where they get a chance to revise one of their promising shorts.
Right.
And, so if you're watching like kind of chronologically, it gets a little samey. You're like, I saw this movie, but I think it's fun to kind of watch the short and then watch the feature and see what stayed in and what got changed, and what they would have done differently if they'd had the chance. I like to see when they do get that opportunity.
I think in a roundabout way, my point is that not every filmmaker can handle that next step and handle even money, right? Like, look at poor Josh Trank. He made a arguably really good film, and then they gave him Fantastic Four, and that was one of
They set him up to fail with that one.
They did, and he never got to really come back from it. But, some filmmakers, they get their shot, and then they just get to kind of do their dream projects. Like, Joe Dante is still waiting on money and he's like 80 years old to make like the Joe Dante film. That his work just speaks so much. It elevated past whatever budget he had, whatever constraints he had. All of his films are just like, his early films were super confined to New Zealand. Like, that's what he was constrained by. And,
well, I don't know I think he was just writing his experience, and like nobody else is making movies about New Zealand. Really, there's like just a handful of directors doing that, and New Zealand's most famous director, Peter Jackson, was shooting in New Zealand, but not about New Zealand per se, Like, Dead Alive was set there, obviously, but like Lord of the Rings is just sort of like, oh, I know where there's a weird hill that looks like a Shire. Come with me. So, the fact that there aren't a ton of people making films from that perspective, I think exploring that space is good because A, he knows that well, and B, people aren't sick of it because they haven't seen it before, and I think they're hungry for new perspectives. So I think it was a good choice to make a bunch of movies about New Zealand.
Like, scope is not an issue with him, whether it's on a small scope or a large scope. It seems to be handled with the same kind of deftness with either one. And another thing that I'll say that elevates him above his peers is he is so good at, of course, writing, but scene building. Some of his scenes, like I'll go to a scene from Jojo Rabbit, and I want to be kind of ambiguous because Jojo Rabbit's still fairly new. I think it's still in theaters at the time of this recording, so not everyone got a chance to see it yet, so I don't want to really spoil anything. But we've all seen, if you've seen any kind of period piece set in World War II Nazi Germany, we've seen the Gestapo scene, Schindler's List, or most famously like Inglourious Bastards, where it's always an extremely tension-filled scene. And I mean, Tarantino probably arguably did it the best with the opening sequence in Inglourious Bastards, where it is probably one of the most white-knuckle nail-biting scenes ever. And that's not even being hyperbolic. I think that scene really holds up as far as tension goes. But I
really like how he injected what people thought was levity into it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you remember that scene, listeners, but Hans Landa said, do you mind if I practice my English with you? And I was like, ha! The audience kind of laughed because they're like, oh, geez. They're like, oh, people don't want to read subtitles the whole movie. So he started like 2 minutes in the movie, he's like, oh, there's subtitles. And everyone's like, oh, no. And he's like, you mind if we do the rest of this movie in English? Wink. And so the whole audience laughed, and he's like, okay. Then like 30 seconds later, you realize he's speaking in English so that the people hiding under the floorboard don't realize what's going on. And I thought having such a tense scene and pretending to break it up with a little levity, but being like, no, you're actually going to get the hammer now, I thought was masterful.
I thought the first time I saw it, I'm like, oh, this is how Tarantino is going to incorporate the N-word into Nazi Germany. But, I was wrong.
Do you have any of them? Did you see a sign out front that said Jew storage? Cut that.
He subverted my expectations. No, but there's a scene in Jojo Rabbit. Again, no spoilers, but he does the tension almost just as well, but also makes it so unsettling because there is so much humor injected into this scene, and there's even some heart too. Like there's moments of real grabbing on the heartstrings, all in the same scene. So you're constantly just like, you get this like split-second release, and then you're laughing, and then you're like, oh shit, daddy hitting mommy at the dinner table, and it's like keeps recycling that over and over and over again. So. And that's not just that. Like, there's a couple of those type of scenes in What We Do in the Shadows. Like, when he brings home, like, the first girl, and it's just, like, he's so nice, and they're all talking, and she's telling him how she's gonna go, go to school and stuff. And it almost looks like, this girl really has a shot at a future. I'm not gonna... And then the next scene, he's like, oh, God, I hit the jugular. And it's, like, blood everywhere. So... there is a real craftsmanship as far as his writing goes, just with specific scenes, and he allows them to breathe too. It's not so jump cutty. Like, he'll stay in certain scenes and let it develop, which is really great. Which is really something that sets him apart.
That's not necessarily super easy to know how to do either. To focus on something until it's funny, and then stops being funny because you did it too long, and then becomes funny again. That's tough to do. It's a really hard technique, and it's very effective if you pull it off, but it's hard to dial in for sure.
Yeah, because if you're thinking about, especially comedies a comedy is on a metronome, right? It's on like a clock. It says you got to say your joke, and then you got to let the audience laugh at it. where a tension scene, it's slow and it's building, and to balance those two different cadences is extremely difficult. And one of the moments of clarity in one of his interviews, he told this story a lot, where he's just like, they're like, did you wear the Hitler costume while you were directing? He's like, well, yeah, I was in a lot of the scenes. And so he was just like, hey, can you do that scene again like this? And then they look at him kind of weird because he has a little mustache on. He's like, I'm not telling you to do it. You don't have to if you don't want to. He's just like, it was just a really weird feeling. He's just like, I don't want you to think that I'm telling you what to do because I'm wearing this.
Wouldn't that command more respect on set? It's like, we need to... It's like, Mr. Waititi, I'm very tired. We've done 10 takes. I think we got it. It's like, you Phil, shoot the scene.
I mean, he was really going to be the only one that was going to cast himself as Hitler, right? Because, like, how does he... It's bad enough trying to push that that narrative to get money from studios, even though he's like, hey, I resurrected Thor, I made all this money with Ragnarok, I want to do this, and that's hard enough, but to ask an actor to kind of jump in that role when Daniel Day-Lewis has retired, who else is going to play it but Taika Waititi himself, and that's something that he's very comfortable in, is being in front of the camera, certainly in interviews, but also in all of his roles. He's just a very naturally funny person, and in every scene that he's in his acting roles, he's kind of stealing the show also.
Can you imagine Daniel Day-Lewis playing Hitler? Like, he'd be fine on screen, but on offset, it'd be like, Mr. Day-Lewis, here's your latte. Mr. Day-Lewis. Mr. Hitler. Oh, thank you.
Can you stop?
I do not know this Mr. Daniel Day-Lewis. I've never heard of him before. You can call me Adolf. I've been vegetarian for 7 months to play this part.
Daniel Plainview kind of looks like Adolf Hitler a little bit, just with a better mustache.
Yeah. Well, I mean, by better mustache, I mean just didn't have the mustache, for sure.
Well, he has a huge mustache.
Acting's easy. So he didn't make it look harder than it is. There are two types of people that make acting look harder than it is. There are the Chris Hemsworths of the world. Is like, wow, he's not very good at this. It's a good thing he's handsome. It's Channing Tatum on the set of Foxcatcher, like, what's my motivation? You wrestle a guy in this scene. Like, you fucking dullard.
Yeah.
And then the other people that make acting look hard are the people like, I slept on a straw mattress for 6 months and made everyone call me Abraham Lincoln. It's like, fuck, dude, how hard is it? You just show up on set and you're like, Mr. Day-Lewis, that's where you stand. And action. I'm Abraham Lincoln. Cut. We got it. All right. I'll be in my trailer. How hard is that? So those are the two kinds of people that make acting look hard. And Waititi is not either one of those two groups. So congrats, you did it.
Do you think it's harder to act in the thing that you wrote, or is it harder to act for...
Easier. You don't have to direct an actor if you were the actor.
Sure.
Like, explaining what you want somebody to do, and they may or may not get it. They could be limited by their ability to understand your direction. We could be limited by your ability to convey your direction.
Yeah.
You could be limited by their propensity for putting their own spin on it. They're like, I'm number one on the call sheet. I'm not going to let some nerd who makes Flight of the Conchords episodes tell me how to act. I don't know. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. When you are the guy, you're like, oh, I know what I want me to do, and I don't have to waste everyone's time explaining it to me.
Right.
I'm going to go look at the monitor and see if I did the thing that I wanted me to do, and I did. So let's move on. It's going to be way easier to direct yourself.
Sure.
100%.
I'm not arguing. I was just getting your take on it. I probably agree with you.
I have no idea. I have never acted or directed myself as an actor.
Sure.
I have no idea, but I just can't imagine that it's tougher.
Right.
He's like, I'm going to take my direct
actor hat off for a second and put on my actor hat and tell me what to do. Like, I think you know what you want, and it's very easy to know whether you did it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you wanted you to.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's not like he Stephen King's it, or he even like Stan Lee'd it. Like he put himself front and center in a lot of these films, and he always put himself in not the most savory not the most savory characters, but they're always the characters of man children, like the dad from Boy, Alamein. You know, he's this.
He isn't it interesting that he made Honey Boy, 10 years before Honey Boy.
Right, yeah.
I wonder if there's like a definitive list of all the times that's been done where it's sort of like, well, my dad was a bastard and I'm going to play my dad being a bastard in the movie that's semi-autographical about me. Mm-hmm. I really think that's an interesting take. When they're like trying to convey, okay, someone hurt me, but how do I put myself in their position in order to try to convey what, or humanize them, instead of seeing them as a monolithic bad guy in my own story? How do I portray that? How do I, get in their headspace and tell their story? So I think that's a really interesting take on it. And I think the fact that he got to it 10 years earlier is real interesting. And, it's too bad he wasn't better known back then.
He probably did the same a little bit with Eagle and Shark too, where he casts his real life girlfriend at the time, and maybe there was some truth in that. Maybe he was kind of grew up a little awkward. So he does. I think he does put a lot, but he not only puts himself in these roles, but he puts, like you said, the thing that he feels like he's lacking. So he's just like, what would it feel like to have these moments with this person? Well, now I'm going to play it on screen. This is how I think it would be. So, and that is, we agreed that acting in roles that you write for yourself might be quite easier, but as far as that goes, because you have a idea in your mind of the authenticity of this person, but you are void of actual experience, like real life experiences. So it's super interesting that he chooses those types of roles. One thing that I really love that he did in his earlier films, now he's kind of using more well-known film scores, but he was using a lot of local New Zealand bands to score the entire films, like original music for like Eagle versus Shark and Boy. The Phoenix Foundation did it, and
I wonder if that's a MacGyver reference.
Maybe. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
MacGyver's sort of my shit.
Yeah, we got to put you on a MacGyver trivia show.
Oh, that would be embarrassing.
Because of how well you would do?
Yeah, I do very well. And everyone's like, why, though? Because you can't... I'm not bragging. You can't brag about being good at MacGyver trivia.
Right.
Like, who's impressed? There's no groupies for MacGyver. There's no woman's like, when he got that question about how in season 1, episode 14 on the cruise ship, he used... It was actually xenon and not freon inside the tube from that neon light in the bar.
Oh, boy.
When he got that question right, I knew I had to go home with him. That's never happened, so...
Maybe it should, though. Maybe you're starting a new...
Just seems a little niche.
A little bit. But...
Because the Venn diagram of people who are good at the internet and people who have seen all of MacGyver is two circles that, don't really touch. It's just basically me at that asymptote, right? So
his next feature, titled Next Goal Wins, is coming out this year. Going from from Jojo Rabbit to now a soccer movie. Not exactly where I thought he'd be taking us, but it's a comedy with Michael Fassbender and Elizabeth Moss, because that's who you think of when you... and Armie Hammer, that is comedy A-list, right?
Wait.
So terrible they had to cast him twice in The Social Network. He's getting these movie stars now, but he's also still using people like Rachel House, and like the second lead in Jojo Rabbit was like his neighbor's daughter. So it's not... he's still able to, Tomasin McKenzie, she's also a Kiwi. So yes, Taika Waititi, he has carved out quite a space for himself in the upper echelon of filmmakers. He is kind of part of this new renaissance of filmmakers that could go real funny, and then also has balances out with some real heart. And like I said, maybe not off our recommendation, maybe not watch all of his films like back to back to back, because they tend to kind of bleed into each other. But definitely, there's not really one to take off. And that's saying something. I don't think I've said that really about any of the filmmakers. Maybe no, I don't know. I feel like there's always a stinker in the filmography, and I don't see a blaring one for Taika Waititi.
No stinkers for Waititi.
Yeah.
Well, that's because he hasn't made his Time Bandits TV series yet. So let's reserve judgment about his flawless filmography.
Yeah. Next Goal Wins is going to be the one.
Oh, well, if it truly stars Armie Hammer, then there's no hope for it. He's never been anything good. So
I'm a little taken aback that he's already Jojo Rabbit was good, but he's already getting Best Picture nominations. That's crazy.
This year was very weak for it. 2019 was not a good year for movies.
If Parasite just doesn't clean up on everything, I can never watch the Oscars again. Yes, that was our ramblings on Taika Waititi, fantastic filmmaker. If you liked this, go ahead and click that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up. Tell us your favorite Taika Waititi, aka Taika Cohen film, down in the comments section downstairs. Or, hit us up on the social media platforms actually just hit us up on Twitter at film_hooligans. If you want to listen to this in podcast form only, you could do so on all the platforms for podcasting sites like iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Leave us all the hearts and the chickens and whatever else you leave for audio only formats. But yes, if you want to talk movies with me, you could do so personally at OrzovDone on Twitter. Jason Edwan the Alt. Where can everyone find you?
I'm on the Twitters at Jason E. Alt, and if you check out the pin post that has all the other projects I work on online, thank you so much for tuning in.